Ever get that feeling like there's a whole secret history going on?
Alongside the one we think we know.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Hidden groups pulling the strings.
yeah, like hidden groups with their own agendas and knowledge, just shaping the world, and even like our beliefs, the things we just take for granted.
They've been there all along.
Well, that's what we're diving into today. We're taking a deep dive into secret societies throughout history.
It has been quite the journey putting this together, you know.
Tell me about it.
We've been digging through ancient historical accounts.
Religious texts.
Mythology. I mean, the whole shebang, just to try and understand this really complex topic.
So, I mean, straight off the bat, our aim here, right? It's not about conspiracies. We're not here to say everyone's, in the Illuminati or whatever.
Right.
We want to understand how secret societies work, like what drives them. What are their goals, long-term goals?
Exactly. And also to look at the impact they've had, in ways we might not even realize.
Yeah. On things we think we know. History, ideas, big events,
A fresh perspective.
Exactly. Give you, the listener, a new way to look at it all. So first things first, right? How do these groups even start? What makes people join?
Well, a lot of our sources point to this idea of exclusivity, being in the know. Like some religions, they often present themselves as this select group.
Oh, right, with the real knowledge.
Exactly. They have the real knowledge, the truth, the deeper understanding of how things work.
And that's appealing to a lot of people, right? Wanting to be in that inner circle.
Definitely. There's that human need to be part of something special, something not everyone gets.
And I mean, we even see it in the Bible, don't we?
The narrow path.
Yeah, the narrow path. Like this idea that only a select few find the true way.
Right. Salvation, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it.
How does that kind of thinking, how does that play into the psychology of joining a secret society?
Well, it makes people feel important, valued,
Yeah.
chosen, even if the initiation at the beginning isn't that difficult. The idea that you're part of something special, it creates a powerful bond.
Right. It's like, I don't know, those clubs you have.
Different tiers.
Yeah, like you start off at a basic level, but, you can work your way up.
Gain more access, more knowledge.
And privileges. Makes you feel like you're really in.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's not just secret societies,
Oh, yeah.
This whole system, you see it everywhere.
So, okay, someone joins, they feel special, they're in the club, but how do these societies make sure they stick around, stay loyal to the cause?
Well, here's where it gets even more interesting.
I like interesting.
Our sources, they talk about a kind of mental reset. Early on in the initiation, you have to shed old beliefs.
The things that don't fit with the society's core ideas.
Yeah. And it's deliberate.
Really?
Really. We saw some fascinating parallels with military training.
Oh, wow. How so?
Well, they use intense psychological pressure to break down old ways of thinking.
To make you more open to their...
Doctrine.
Yeah, to their doctrine.
It's about creating a shared mindset, conformity.
Makes sense. So they break you down, then build you back up in their image. And the sources even mention that some groups actually tell their members to ignore anything that goes against their teaching.
Including, potentially, the state.
Yeah, like the laws of the land, the government, the whole system, if it contradicts the society.
Exactly. The society becomes the ultimate authority.
Wow. Okay, so if we step back a bit, look at the bigger picture. How have secret societies operated over time, according to, what we've been reading?
Well, one of the most striking claims, many organizations, even religions, we think of as totally mainstream. They started out as secret societies.
Oh, really? Like which ones?
Even something like the Nazi Party.
No way.
That's what some of these sources argue.
So basically, history is not what we think it is?
It certainly challenges the traditional narrative. The argument is, throughout history, secret societies, their main goal has been power, to become the dominant force.
Running everything.
Exactly. The merging of church and state, as they say.
Right. So everything we think is separate actually has these hidden links.
Precisely.
And the material even goes so far as to say that the history of secret societies, it's like the real history of humanity, the one they don't teach you in school.
A hidden history. And there's even this connection to modern genetic research.
Oh, interesting. What's that about?
Well, it shows how interconnected we all are, genetically, relatively recently.
Like we all came from a small group not that long ago.
Exactly. Which suggests that maybe our belief systems, our core beliefs.
That might have a common origin, too.
Exactly. Shared roots.
Wow. So not just isolated groups popping up, but this continuous, like, hidden thread.
Precisely. And another point they make,
Yeah.
human behavior.
Mm.
When you look at it through this lens, through secret societies, it's cyclical.
Oh, interesting. Like repeating patterns.
Yeah, exactly. Suggesting that maybe we can predict the future, in a way,
By understanding these patterns, that's pretty powerful.
if these cycles exist. And that's a big if, of course. Okay, let's move on. Another fascinating aspect we found, the use of hidden meanings and symbolism.
Ah, yes, the secret code.
The stuff underneath the surface.
So, like, how do we even know about this stuff if it's hidden?
Well, some argue that historical narratives, the way we understand history, it's been skewed intentionally by those in power.
And when did this happen?
Oh, throughout history, really. But a good example, the Victorian era.
Super Christian.
Exactly. That intense Christian focus.
Yeah.
They suppressed or reinterpreted anything that didn't fit.
Like conflicting evidence.
Right. And a good example, accounts of pre-Christian crucified deities.
Wow. So, like, evidence of other saviors.
Exactly. And those in power just erased it or changed the story.
And that's where secret societies come in. They preserve these alternative narratives.
Through hidden means, codes, symbols,
Ah, the secret language. And our sources suggest they've been using it for a long time. Millennia, they say.
It's like a secret handshake, but for ideas.
And this language, it's not just static. It evolves.
Exactly. It becomes more complex over time, harder to crack.
Really makes you wonder, like, what are we missing?
Maybe we're surrounded by symbols we don't even understand.
They gave some examples, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. Hidden symbols in everyday logos. You wouldn't believe it.
So what are we supposed to do? Like, start seeing conspiracies everywhere?
Well, the sources emphasize the need to be more observant, to look for multiple layers of meaning in texts, art, architecture.
You mentioned the zodiac, right? And numerology.
Exactly. It's all connected. But we also have to be careful.
How so?
We can't just impose our modern understanding onto ancient symbols.
Right. Like seeing aliens everywhere just because something's old and we don't get it.
Exactly. They use the example of ancient structures, people saying aliens built them, without understanding the context.
The culture, the beliefs of the people who actually built them.
Precisely. Now let's get into something a little controversial. The idea that some core belief systems, the things we take for granted, they might be based on, well, lies and hidden knowledge.
Okay, I'm listening, but that sounds a bit conspiracy-ish.
It does. And this is where the Illuminati comes in, although they might have had different names throughout history.
Right.
The idea is this shadowy group, they've been manipulating our beliefs for centuries.
How? Like mind control?
Not exactly. More like understanding human psychology.
Yeah.
And using it.
To shape our beliefs.
Exactly. Tapping into our desires, our fears, our need for meaning.
And the sources highlight this ancient reverence for the sun and the moon, like how they control our lives and how that led to, making them gods.
Right. It's not hard to imagine how early humans, they saw the sun, the moon, controlling everything.
The seasons, the tides, everything.
And they thought, well, they must be gods.
Powerful beings. And our sources suggest that secret societies, they might have had a deeper understanding of these forces.
More than the average person.
The knowledge that was lost or maybe hidden?
Kept secret. And this leads to another big theme, the importance of cycles and rhythms.
Like the cycles of nature, day and night, the seasons.
Exactly. And our sources focus a lot on the moon.
Oh, interesting. Why the moon?
They link it to, well, everything really. The tides, obviously.
Yeah.
But also the female menstrual cycle.
The moon menstruation, that's a strong connection.
Very strong. And it influenced early beliefs.
How so?
Well, menstrual blood was seen as powerful, sacred, but also dangerous.
Taboo.
Right. And our sources suggest this might have been a later development in more patriarchal societies.
Where men were in charge.
Exactly. The moon, the feminine, it became associated with madness.
Like the word lunatic.
Exactly. That's a direct link to the moon.
Wow. It's amazing how language keeps these old ideas alive, even if we don't realize it.
Right. And even in religion, the moon is important. Jewish Passover, Christian Easter.
They're calculated based on lunar cycles.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the sun.
The source of all life.
Right. Associated with wisdom, power, light.
Like the Egyptian god Ra.
Right. Adam Ra, the sun god. And our sources also mentioned the 11.1-year solar cycle.
The sun has a cycle.
It does. And they link it to all sorts of earthly phenomena, even the god Yahweh.
The God of the Old Testament.
Exactly. They say he has solar and volcanic aspects.
Like reflecting the power of the sun.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And then there's Michel Gauquelin.
Who's that?
He had this controversial theory about the position of the planets at birth and how it influences us.
Our personality, our destiny.
Exactly.
Some people believe in astrology.
Right. And while Gauquelin's work is debated, it shows that we're still fascinated by the stars.
And humans have been studying the stars for a long time?
A long time. The sources mentioned evidence going back 32,000 years.
What?
And they connect these observations to, well, some pretty advanced stuff, like an early understanding of electromagnetism.
Really?
And gravity's influence on the human mind.
So they weren't just stargazing, they were trying to understand the forces of the universe.
Exactly. And maybe even how those forces affect us.
And this leads to alchemy, right?
They say the ideas and symbolism of alchemy, it might be rooted in this ancient understanding
Of hidden powers.
and earthly tools.
So alchemy wasn't just about making gold.
Not just about that.
Yeah.
It was about understanding the connections between things, the energy of the universe.
Fascinating. And you also mentioned the zodiac and the sun's journey through it.
Right. The sun goes through each sign, right?
Yeah.
And they link that to the stories of, well, the man gods, like Jesus, Horus.
The dying and rising gods.
Exactly. It's a cyclical narrative, death, rebirth, renewal, like the cycle of the year.
And Carl Jung, he also talked about this, didn't he?
He did. He said the zodiac, it's an archetype.
Like a fundamental pattern in our minds.
Exactly. Part of the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
These shared images, ideas that we all inherit.
And the sources even discuss cosmic radiation and how it also has cycle.
Affecting life on Earth. It's this idea that everything is connected.
And they even compare the movement of the planets to our own internal thoughts.
A reflection between outer and inner space.
Very poetic.
And this ties into the Hindu concept of reincarnation, the cycle of life and death.
Death and rebirth.
Exactly. And then they explain the astrological chart as a kind of picture of your life.
Like snapshot.
Right. The idea is the position of the planets at your birth,
Yeah.
it imprints on you, on your nervous system, your energy.
Wow. And they also talk about how different civilizations all over the world, they came up with similar things,
Sun temples, the cross symbol,
suggesting a common source.
maybe. They link this to the idea of resonant energy, like there's a kind of vibration throughout the universe.
And they even mention quantum entanglement. That's wild.
Right. This idea that particles, even when separated by huge distances, they're still connected
And they suggest that ancient prophets, they were tapping into this.
to this cosmic hum or divine voice.
Wow.
It's blending the mystical with the scientific.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. Talk about secret knowledge and how it was accessed.
Right. So we have divination.
Telling the future, communicating with spirits, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And there are many forms of divination. The sources mention necromancy.
Contacting the dead.
Right. Astrology, interpreting the stars.
Dream interpretation, right?
Oneiromancy, yeah. And geomancy.
Geomancy, that's interpreting patterns on the earth, like reading the landscape.
Exactly. And they mention that geomancy often uses special codes and symbols.
So secret knowledge again. Only the initiated understand.
Right. And the sources also talk about ancient priests and how they controlled their minds.
Through, like, meditation?
Meditation, but also through understanding energy cycles. Magnetism, they say. They use drugs, physical exertion.
To achieve enlightenment.
Exactly. To reach that holy grail of existence.
And to gain secret knowledge. The elixir.
Right. It was a serious pursuit. They were dedicated to it.
And that brings us to the serpent. Right. And its connection to the grail.
The serpent. It's a powerful symbol used by secret societies all over the world.
We've talked about it before, and our sources, they bring up Kundalini energy.
The coiled serpent at the base of the spine.
Right. And how it rises to the skull.
Unlocking higher consciousness.
Powerful stuff. And the sources, they connect this to the skull cup imagery.
Which is found in various traditions. Wrathful deities. Padmasambhava, the Tibetan master.
And the skull cup, it's said to contain the elixir, the nectar of immortality.
It's a striking image.
Yeah. So the skull, the mind, it's connected to this idea of life-giving power.
Exactly. And this elixir, it was central to many secret orders.
It's what they were searching for.
And it was a powerful motivator to join, to stay loyal, because they believed it could give you incredible power.
To extend life, to achieve, like, supernatural abilities.
Right. And the skull itself, it also has symbolic importance.
In rituals.
Initiations, often
Exactly.
associated with regenerative powers. and the idea of longevity through blood
Blood, like drinking blood.
from a sacred vessel.
Okay, this is getting pretty intense. But how did this imagery, these ideas, how did they get to Europe?
Good question. The sources mention Livy, the Roman historian.
Yeah.
He described a similar practice among the Celts, using skulls, in the 3rd century AD.
So maybe there's a connection there between these seemingly different cultures.
Maybe. And then there's the biblical story of the brazen serpent.
Moses and the snake on the pole.
Right. Our sources, they interpret it differently. They say the serpent was a symbol replacing the skull and the offering of blood. It represented the ultimate sacrifice for immortality.
Interesting. So a different way of looking at a familiar story, and then they bring up Christ.
The idea that Christ is all and in all,
Meaning?
maybe it suggests that everyone has the potential for this kind of transformation,
Through Christ.
who they call a shamanic deity, because he journeyed to the other world and back.
Died and was resurrected.
Exactly. And they also talk about Padma, the figure of Padma,
Who's that?
a master who gained power through the serpent and secret language.
Another connection.
And then there's the story of Garab Dorje, born of a virgin.
Like Jesus.
Right. These themes, they reappear throughout history.
And then there's the Holy Blood, Holy Grail theory.
Oh, yes.
The idea that the Grail isn't a cup, but actually royal blood, a bloodline from Jesus.
Right.
But our sources, they debunk that.
They do. They cite Walter Skeet, the etymologist.
The word guy.
Exactly. He argued that sangral, it comes from the Latin crotella, meaning a small bowl, a mixing bowl.
So no bloodline.
Not literally, no.
That-
They say figures like Christ, St. John, Horus, Asclepius, they're archetypal serpent deities.
Representing wisdom, healing, transformation.
Exactly. And they mention the dragon cup of St. John. Again, the serpent connection.
And they even mention 16th century German coins with Christ on the cross and a serpent.
The one who healed all.
Wow. So the serpent wasn't always seen as evil?
Not at all. It was a symbol of healing, too. And in the Bible, it plays a big role. Adam and Eve, obviously.
Yeah.
And Eve literally means female serpent.
Whoa, I never knew that.
And she's connected to older serpent goddesses, Sumerian, Canaanite,
Great.
and even the constellation serpents, they called it Little Eve.
It's all connected.
And then there's the story of Adam and Seth.
Seth was called the son of serpents, wasn't he?
Exactly. So the sources, they suggest a different interpretation of the Genesis story.
Not the serpent as tempter.
Right. They say it's about knowledge,
Mhm.
like the Gnostics believed.
Finding knowledge within yourself. Through Kundalini.
Exactly. It flips the whole story on its head.
And even the story of St. Paul in Malta with the snakes.
They suggest it might have been early Christian marketing to gain converts.
Co-opting the local serpent worship.
Exactly. Adapting to local beliefs.
Mhm.
But they also point out that all this doesn't fully explain the immortality thing.
The serpent and immortality.
Right. So they start looking for a scientific basis.
A scientific explanation for a myth.
They suggest that maybe the ancients, they used snake venom.
As an elixir of life.
It's possible.
But how?
Well, they talk about the mixing bowl imagery. The skull cup,
Right.
maybe they use those to prepare a mixture with snake venom in it.
But snake venom is poisonous.
It is. But in small doses, it can have psychoactive effects.
Altering consciousness.
Exactly. And they suggest that these altered states, they might have been interpreted as spiritual experiences.
Like enlightenment or visions of the other world.
Right. And they even mention an early Christian group, the Agatha demon.
Meaning?
Good serpent.
They supposedly used live snakes in their communion.
Whoa.
And there are early Christian depictions of Jesus as a snake or as a Tau cross.
Wow.
And they point out that in ancient Africa, they use snake parts for healing.
Snake venom as medicine.
The venom glands were prized.
Makes sense.
But they also mention that ingesting snake venom, it can cause genetic mutation, like physical changes.
Right. Elongated skulls, they say?
Like those found in Malta.
Exactly. So their conclusion is that the modern Grail myth, it's mostly wrong.
No bloodline, no literal cup.
Right. They say the Grail, it's a symbol of Christ as the good serpent.
Offering the elixir of eternal life.
Through Gnostic knowledge, and maybe even through actual snake venom.
Okay, I'm following.
And they connect this to the shedding of skin.
Like a snake shedding its skin.
Exactly. A symbol of rebirth, renewal, like Christ's resurrection.
Emerging from the tomb.
Right. Yeah. And figures like King Arthur, they're later versions of this, seeking the ancient secrets.
Okay, I'm with you, but this is all pretty mind-blowing.
It is. Now let's talk about the Illuminati and the Watchers.
The Watchers.
Right. Our sources start with Zechariah Sitchin, He interpreted Sumeria as the land of the Watchers.
Which he equates with the biblical land of Shinar.
Yes, and the Egyptian term Tan-Niter.
Interesting.
And he says the Sumerian Elohim came from there too, the ones who ruled the Watchers.
And Julian Jaynes, he also had a perspective on this.
He did. He said that in ancient Mesopotamia, all land belonged to the gods.
And humans were just their slaves.
Right, and this is supported by the cuneiform texts.
Interesting.
And they say each city-state had its own god, with the king as a kind of representative.
The steward.
Exactly. And then there's Albert Pike, the Mason. He had a different interpretation of the Elohim. He saw them as the host of heaven, messengers between God and humans.
And they say that Yahweh Elohim just means leader of the illuminated ones.
Exactly. So the idea of illuminated ones is important here. And the Watchers, they're described as being like angels.
Some of them fell, right?
Right. Became the fallen angels. But others remain holy, the Watchers in the fifth heaven.
And the book of Enoch talks about this.
It does. Enoch is protected by the ruling illuminated ones and taken to the Garden of Eden.
After seeing what the fallen Watchers did.
Exactly. And the sources, they emphasize this idea of the illuminated ones as leaders and the Watchers as their agents.
And they connect that to secret societies.
Right. The leaders of secret societies, they often claim religious authority.
Like they're chosen by a higher power?
Precisely. And they also mention that some of the figures who were divinized, like the Anunnaki and Nephilim,
The men of renown.
right, they might have originally been human.
Just really wise or powerful people
Correct.
who were later elevated to God status.
Exactly. It blurs the lines. And then they introduce the concept of genius loci,
Which is
guardian spirits of places.
like a spirit of a particular city.
A city, a state, a specific location.
Interesting.
And they say the Romans, they even asked about the guardian spirits of enemy cities.
Before attacking them.
Exactly. They wanted to know what they were up against.
Wow. And then there's the term egregore.
Which means
It's a Gnostic term, right? A kind of collective unconscious.
connected to the Watchers, like a group mind.
And Eliphas Levi, he connected egregorus to the giants in the book of Enoch.
Seeing them as powerful entities that could even take on physical forms.
And then there's John Dee, the 16th century mystic.
He was aware of the Book of Enoch and used it in his work.
And he was also a spy.
Right. For Queen Elizabeth I.
A mystic and a spy. That's an interesting combination.
It is. And they even connect Dee's spy number 007.
James Bond.
Right. And Queen Elizabeth's codename, M, they connect those to the Illuminati.
Wow. And the Rosicrucians are mentioned, too, as a possible response to the Jesuits.
Right. Different groups vying for power and influence.
And then there's the story of the pillars built by the lord of the tribe of Ad.
Located in the empty quarter of Arabia, possibly the lost city of Ubar.
And these pillars, they're connected to the Nephilim, the Watchers, the Illuminated Ones, the Iram.
All of them.
It's like these myths, they have real places associated with them.
It's fascinating. And the Book of Enoch, it was very influential on Western esoteric traditions.
They say it was known since at least the 13th century.
And figures like Robert Flood, they considered Enoch to be the father of all Western secret orders.
Wow. So whether these beings were real or not, their ideas have had a huge impact.
Absolutely. And the Thesaurus Temporum from the 17th century, it even gives a specific timeline for these egregores.
When they descended, when Enoch was taken to paradise.
Exactly. So this knowledge was being preserved, passed down secretly.
But why keep it secret?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
And then they move on to the modern occult view of the egregore.
As a thought form created by a group.
Right. Like a shared energy field, similar to Kundalini. And they talk about Rosicrucian and Martinist perspectives on this.
But there are also more negative views.
Like Marcelo Ramos Mota, who said the egregore demands worship.
Wow.
And Sir Ormston IV, he called it a group spirit that protects the fraternity and connects to the Prince of Darkness.
Okay, that's pretty dark.
It is. But it shows how these concepts can be interpreted in different ways.
Okay, so let's move on to something a bit more grounded, the science behind some of these ancient beliefs and structures.
Right. So they talk about Joe Parr and his experiments with pyramids.
Pyramids, like the Egyptian ones.
Similar. He built pyramid shapes and aligned them with the Earth's magnetic grid.
North, south, east, west.
Exactly.
Mm.
And he found some pretty amazing things.
Like
An energy bubble formed around the pyramid.
an energy bubble.
Right. That blocked radiation and weakened other energy sources.
Really?
And they say negative ions made the energy stronger.
Interesting. And they connect this to those tall cylindrical structures found all over the world.
Ones they link to serpent worship?
Yeah.
Maybe they were built to interact with these energies somehow.
And the Dead Sea Scrolls, they mention towers guarded by angels.
Or watchers. It's this idea that these structures were connected to the spiritual realm.
Maybe they were entrances to the other world.
That's what they suggest.
Yeah.
And they're often associated with water, too, and with Earth's magnetic energy.
So maybe they were tapping into something.
And they mentioned the Phoenicians. They also built similar towers,
Hmm.
dedicated to Baal, their rain god,
And there are thousands of these towers in Sardinia.
near the old city of Carthage.
Wow.
And the cylindrical tower, it's also connected to the Egyptian Djed pillar.
The spine of Osiris,
Right. And that represents the path of Kundalini energy.
rising to illumination.
Exactly. It's all connected.
But some people say these towers were just astronomical instruments.
Like Stonehenge. And they mention the Radkin Tower in Iran.
With its conical roof.
Right. And Rod in its name, possibly meaning serpent.
So maybe it was both.
An astronomical instrument and a spiritual tool.
And they say the cylindrical tower, it evolved into the Indian stupa and the Chinese pagoda.
Keeping that basic shape.
And in Feng Shui, pagodas and stupas are said to trap negative energy.
Which they equate to dragon or serpent energy.
Like in Joe Parr's experiments where negative ions had these strange effects.
Anti-gravitational, anti-electromagnetic.
So maybe these structures were built to control these forces.
Maybe. And they mentioned Madame Blavatsky's serpent stones.
Resembling female figures.
Right. And the stone cones in Sardinia with female breasts inscribed.
And those little pyramidal cones.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.